Well, I've been following several anyway, near-death experiences, and you might have thought, my goodness, that's not focusing on the good, but in fact it's focusing on the extremely good, the ones I've read, because they are largely in relation to people meeting with God in such experiences and in their own way. In other words, the godly experience seems to reflect their life view of God too. At least as regards the person of God, but very often strongly correcting. He's, majorly all-loving rather than the more general Christian view that he's heavily judgmental and final judgment orientated as well. But in particular, these secular near-death experience people still have a God experience, but it tends not to be the personalized Christian God experience, although there are some notable exceptions where a very secular person seems to have met with an extremely Christian God. But that view of the possibility of God being like that seems to be on the cards because of, like, a grandmother or something that had always been praying for the person and so on. Or mother. Typically that sort of thing. A major point that's hit me, though, from one or two of them, one or two analysed the general effect of near-death experiences, that they do indeed reflect what a person thought generally in life before the experience. The obvious, the Christian sees Jesus as God. The Hindu sees Krishna or some great guru and so on. Not sure about that. Partly because the Hindu, I'm not sure his near-death experience is major with the Hindu. Probably because they may not have had quite such a history of medical recovery of people that died temporarily, for a few minutes, even as long as 20 minutes sometimes. But perhaps partly because an Indian Hindu type view anticipates reincarnation as a sequence of progress rather than simply moving from life here to life in heaven. Heaven's a lot further off. Although I'm not sure about that. I think the Hindu view is you may spend your time in the astral, the New Age understanding of it, and come back to the physical reincarnation. But whatever, the near-death experiences that are there on the internet, like YouTube, of course, do seem to give a pattern of experience that's in keeping with, in a sense, the life view of the person. And my argument is, that's the only language you could communicate spiritual things to the individual. So the Christian dies, and if he's going to have a God experience in this time, it's going to be in terms of Jesus. And the secular person, it might be in terms of grandma or a guardian angel, or a guardian, not really an angel, but a very kind one, of course, usually. The variety of experience, near-death experiences, then, don't necessarily deny the benevolence of the future. Although there is some argument that those that have really bad near-death experiences, without such redeeming experiences as well, may be so upset by such that they block, and their story just never gets to being published or publishable. In other words, we only hear the good news, not the bad. Well, that's a bit like trying to study the black market. Of course, the fact that it's black is you can't find it. There's no data out there. It's not there to look at. It's also in parallel with we only see survivors to interview. We can't interview the failures, those that died in any activity. And this biases our research, doesn't it? But you can't prove if the bias is there, or how big and important such is in your forming your conclusions, which of course are in large measure very good when it comes to near-death experiences. There have been notable cases, like Ian McCormack, for instance, who has an experience of hell and heaven. He sees both, and the contrast steers him majorly in his subsequent ministry, of course. An extraordinary healing ministry and miraculous ministry afterwards that he had. Thank you, Dad. I'll just have a re-listen to this recording, see if I should add something. Yes, I wanted to add a reminder that Plato, and writing of Socrates and so on, despised acting because in some sense it degraded the persona of our integrity, in that we practice playing the part of all sorts of characters that are not, in some sense, the ideal. His ideal, of course, was the great deep-thinking philosopher, which he ascribed to himself. Of course, we're always right, aren't we? So he elevates his particular profession. And of course, you can see something of a caste system in this, in that the philosophers are the great leaders of a society, and well, the rest have to all fall in line with their dictates and so on, really. Philosophy is itself a bit of a parody on what's called in the East the sin of self. And what in Christianity has become to be called self-centeredness. Well, I of course see neither as remotely the perfection of self. But the perfection of self is not its annihilation, the annihilation of self, but a final godliness that God has, but in an infinite variety of persons. And I think of the parallel, every flower is beautiful and individual, every snowflake different and beautiful. So are you and I, by the grace and loving kindness of God. Thank you, Heavenly